legs pumping wildly, heart pounding in her chest like a frightened bird. Young Nene raced through the narrow paths between mud brick houses. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the village as she darted between startled goats and curious children. "Come back here, you ungrateful wretch!" The furious voice of Madame Teresa thundered behind her, each word punctuated by the woman's labored breathing. "How dare you taste my stew without permission?" The wooden cooking spoon in Teresa's hand was raised high, still dripping with the peppery palm oil stew that had been Nene's undoing. One small taste. That was all she had taken after hours of grinding peppers, pounding yams, and stirring the pot without a single morsel passing her lips since dawn. "Please, Madame Teresa, I am sorry," Nene cried out, her voice cracking with fear. "I was so hungry I could not help myself." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The woman who had made it her mission to punish Nene for the crime of existing would not be denied her vengeance. Villagers turned away, pretending not to see. This was not the first time, and they knew it would not be the last. Some whispered prayers for the orphan girl with the unbreakable spirit and the smile that somehow survived like a stubborn flower in barren soil. Nene's breath caught in her throat as she turned down a path and found herself facing the unforgiving mud wall that marked the edge of the compound. There was nowhere left to run. Slowly, she turned, her back pressed against the rough surface, eyes wide with terror as Madame Teresa's imposing figure blocked the only escape. "Now I have you," Teresa hissed, her eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. The wooden spoon trembled in her clenched fist. "No one steals from me. No one. My people, gather close and listen well to this tale from our ancestors. It is a story of suffering and triumph, of cruelty and kindness, of deception that leads to unexpected blessings. For in our villages, as in life itself, nothing is ever quite as it first appears, and fate has a way of spinning its web in the most surprising patterns. This is the story of Nene, an orphan girl whose tears watered the path to her destiny, and how the hands that seemed to push her into misfortune were, in truth, guiding her toward her greatest joy. The ancestors say that the orphan's tears are counted by the spirits, each one a seed that will someday blossom into unexpected fortune. Such was the path laid before young Nene, daughter of once respected farmers, whose souls were called to the land of our forefathers, when she was but 7 harvests old. The fever came swiftly to their village of Kosala, nestled between the great savanna and the whispering forest. It took many, including Nini's beloved parents, who had taught her to be strong, to respect the elders, and to always honor the traditions that kept their community in harmony with the spirits of earth and sky. With no one to care for her, Nene was sent to live with her father's brother, Oko, a trader of palm oil and kola nuts who traveled to distant markets. His compound stood near the center of the village, 3 mud brick houses arranged around a courtyard, where chickens scratched in the red earth and yams dried on woven mats under the watchful eye of his wife, Madame Teresa. Ah, Madame Teresa, a woman whose bitterness had grown with each passing season, that her womb remained empty. 30 dry seasons had passed since her marriage to Oko, and with each a childless year, her heart hardened like clay in the hot sun. When Nene arrived at their compound, Teresa saw not a child who needed love, but a living reminder of her failure to give Oko the sons and daughters he desired. "Why should I feed the child of another woman?" she would mutter when Oko was away. "Why should my hands work to raise what my body could not create?" And so began Nene's suffering. While other children played with wooden dolls or learned the stories of their ancestors around evening fires, Nene's small hands scrubbed cooking pots until they cracked and bled. Her days began before the roosters announced the sun, grinding millet and fetching water not from the well in their compound. That was too easy a task for the unwanted child, but from the stream 3 hills away, where crocodiles sometimes lurked in the shadows. "Lazy girl," Teresa would shout, finding fault in even Nene's most perfect work. "Your mother spoiled you. In my house, you will learn what it means to earn your keep." Many nights, Nene would cry silently on her thin mat in the corner of the storage hut, where she slept amongst sacks of grain and dried cassava. The rats would be her only companions, as she whispered to the spirits of her parents, asking why they had left her behind. Yet, when morning came, something remarkable would happen. As Nene stepped into the courtyard to begin her chores, her face would transform. A smile, gentle as the morning breeze, but strong as baobab roots, would spread across her face. This smile, this defiance wrapped in kindness, was her shield and her strength. The village women noticed. "Look at Nene," they would whisper at the market. "Despite everything, her spirit remains unbroken. The ancestors must have blessed her with special strength." This smile infuriated Teresa more than any mistake or disobedience ever could. She would find new ways to break Nene's spirit, giving her impossible tasks, accusing her of stealing food, or simply ignoring her existence for days at a time. And where was Uncle Oko during these trials? A weak man, afraid of his wife's sharp tongue, he would bring small gifts to Nene when returning from his travels, a sweet fruit or a colorful piece of cloth, but never did he stand against his wife's cruelty. When Nene's tears fell at night, they were for the uncle who saw but chose blindness, as much as for the parents she had lost. "Be patient, Nene," he would whisper when Teresa wasn't listening. "One day things will be better." But his promises were as empty as the water jars Nene carried to the distant stream each morning. Little did anyone know that the ancestors were watching, and the winds of change were already beginning to blow across the savannah toward Kosala village. In our African villages, the marketplace is more than a place of trade. It is the beating heart of community life, where news travels faster than the harmattan winds, and destinies often intersect in ways ordained by the ancestors. The Kosala market gathered every 4 days, when traders from neighboring villages would arrive with their wares. Women balanced enormous basins of smoked fish and millet flour on their heads, their colorful wrappers swaying as they moved. Men displayed handcrafted tools and hunted game beneath canopies of woven palm fronds. Merchants from distant cities brought precious salt, kola nuts, and treasured spices that filled the air with intoxicating scents. It was here that Nene found brief moments of joy amid her hardships. Each market day, Madame Teresa would thrust a small worn basket into her hands with barely enough cowries to purchase the ingredients she demanded. "If you waste a single coin, girl, you'll sleep without food for 3 days," Teresa would warn, her eyes narrow with suspicion. "And don't dawdle like a lazy monkey. Return before the sun reaches midpoint." Despite these threats, Nene treasured these expeditions. In the marketplace, she could breathe freely, exchanging quick smiles with other young girls and absorbing the music of laughter and haggling that created a symphony of life around her. It was on one such market day, as Nene carefully counted her cowries before the paper seller's stall, that she first noticed him, an elderly man seated on a wooden wheelchair at the market's edge. His legs, thin as dried cassava stems, seemed useless beneath his faded bubu robe. A small calabash bowl sat before him, containing only a few coins offered by charitable passers-by. The people called him Baba Bola, and children often whispered that he had been cursed by a powerful juju man for stealing sacred artifacts. Others claimed he was being punished for greed in a previous life. Whatever the truth, he had become a fixture in the market, watching the world pass with eyes that missed nothing. As Nene passed his spot, a sudden gust of wind snatched the list Teresa had given her, carrying it directly to Baba Bola's feet. With a soft gasp, she hurried toward him, her eyes downcast in respect as she approached. "Forgive me, Baba," she said, bowing slightly. "The wind has delivered my shopping list to you." The old man's weathered hand reached down with surprising grace, retrieving the scrap of cloth where Teresa had marked her demands with charcoal. "So, the wind believes I should know what Madame Teresa requires today," he said, his voice unexpectedly rich and melodious for one who appeared so frail. His eyes, clear and penetrating, studied Nene's face. "And who might you be, young one with the sunshine smile?" Surprised that he had addressed her directly, for most adults in the village barely acknowledged her existence, Nene raised her eyes to meet his gaze. "I am called Nene, Baba," she replied softly. "Nene," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "In the old tongue, that means gift. Are you a gift, I wonder?" Something in his gentle inquiry loosened the knot of caution she normally carried. "My parents named me before the fever took them. I live with my Uncle Oko and his wife now." "Ah," said Baba Bola, nodding slowly. "I have seen you many times, always rushing, always working, yet always with that smile that defies your circumstances." He handed back the list with a small gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and curiosity. Perhaps the wind knew what it was doing after all. From that day forward, whenever Nene came to the market, she would find a moment to greet the old man. Sometimes she would share a small portion of kola nut she had saved from her meager allowance. Other times, she would simply stop and listen as he told stories of distant lands and ancient wisdom. In him, she found something she had lost when her parents died, someone who truly saw her. What Nene didn't know was that Baba Bola was asking questions about her when she wasn't present. The cloth merchants, the pepper sellers, the palm wine tappers, all had noticed the unlikely friendship forming between the crippled beggar and the orphan girl with the unbreakable spirit. My people, I ask you now, what do you think of this strange friendship between the beggar and the orphan? What hidden currents might be flowing beneath this seemingly simple connection? Share your thoughts in the comments below, for the ancestors say that in story circles, wisdom grows with each voice that joins the tale. The season of rains had just begun when the village of Kosala awoke to shocking news that spread from compound to compound, like wildfire through dry grass. Baba Bola, the crippled beggar from the marketplace, had been seen being pushed in his wheelchair along the path to Oko's compound before the morning cock had even announced the day. What business could a beggar have with a trader's family? Villagers whispered behind cupped hands. Some claimed he was seeking charity. Others suggested more sinister motives involving dark magic and revenge. None could have guessed the true purpose of his visit. Oko had just returned from a trading journey the previous evening and was seated in his courtyard drinking palm wine when the unexpected visitor arrived. Madame Teresa stood frozen in disbelief as the servants who had pushed Baba Bola's wheelchair respectfully retreated to wait at a distance. "Greetings to this household," Baba Bola called out, his voice stronger and more commanding than anyone had ever heard at the marketplace. "I have come on a matter of great importance." Oko, ever mindful of traditions of hospitality, invited the old man to share his morning meal. As they exchanged pleasantries, Madame Teresa watched with suspicious eyes, wondering what scheme this beggar was planning. Then, like thunder from a clear sky, Baba Bola spoke words that would change everything. "I have come to ask for the hand of young Nene in marriage." Silence fell across the compound. Even the birds seemed to hold their songs. Oko's cup of palm wine trembled in his hand, spilling droplets onto the packed earth. Marriage? Oko finally stammered. But Baba, you are, and she is. Before he could fumble through his objections, Madame Teresa's sharp laughter cut through the air. Her eyes gleamed with malicious delight, seeing an unexpected solution to her long-standing problem. What wonderful news, she exclaimed, her voice honey-sweet, but eyes cold as river stones. Our Nini, married at last, and to such a distinguished elder. In the corner of the courtyard, Nene stood frozen, the water jug she had been carrying now forgotten in her trembling hands. Marriage to Baba Bola, the kind old man from the market, who had shown her kindness, yes, but who was old enough to be her grandfather and unable to walk. How would they survive? What kind of life awaited her? The girl accepts with gratitude, Madame Teresa announced, not bothering to consult Nene's wishes. We require no bride price. Your gesture of taking her off our hands is payment enough. Even by village standards, such words were shamefully improper. Oko began to object, but a harsh glare from his wife silenced him as effectively as a hand across his mouth. Later that evening, as Nene wept quietly in a small corner of the storage hut, Uncle Oko visited her with downcast eyes. I am sorry, child, he whispered, but perhaps any life would be better than the one you have here. Baba Bola has been kind to you at the market, has he not? Nene could only nod through her tears. Yes, the old man had been kind, but marriage, to leave with the crippled beggar to an unknown fate. As preparations began for the modest ceremony, tongues wagged throughout Kosala. Some elders shook their heads in disapproval at the unsuitable match. Young men who had secretly admired Nene's beauty and strength felt a twinge of jealousy, wondering why they had not acted sooner. Old women crossed their fingers against evil, suspecting darker purposes behind such an unusual arrangement. Yet, through it all, something strange flickered in Baba Bola's eyes whenever he visited the compound. A knowing look, a hidden smile quickly suppressed, and occasionally, when he thought no one was watching, a straightening of his supposedly useless legs. The morning of Nene's departure broke with a sky painted in shades of amber and gold, as if the ancestors themselves were watching this pivotal moment in her young life. The small ceremony binding her to Baba Bola had been performed the previous evening, a rushed affair with none of the usual celebrations that would accompany a bride's passage to her new home. No drums announced her status as a new wife. No ululations from female relatives blessed her journey. No procession of friends carried gifts to establish her new household. Instead, Nene stood at the edge of the compound with a small bundle containing the few possessions she could call her own. A wrapper her mother had woven, a carved wooden comb, and a string of beads, given to her by a kind market woman who had often slipped her extra portions of food. Madame Teresa made no attempt to hide her satisfaction, her smile wide as the Niger River as she roughly adjusted Nini's head wrap. Remember this kindness, she hissed into the girl's ear. We could have demanded payment for raising you all these years. Instead, we give you freely to your husband. Uncle Oko stood awkwardly to the side, his eyes unable to meet Nene's. In his hands, he clutched a small leather pouch. For your journey, he mumbled, pressing it into her palm when Teresa wasn't looking. Inside were a few precious coins and a small amulet of protection. Too little, too late, but something nonetheless. What surprised everyone was the conveyance waiting to carry them away. Not the rickety wheelchair from the marketplace, but a covered wagon, pulled by 2 strong oxen, their coats gleaming with health and care. 2 servants, dressed in simple but clean garments, stood ready to assist their master. As Baba Bola was helped into the wagon by his attendants, several villagers gathered at a distance, curiosity and superstition mingling in their expressions. Some made protective signs against evil, while others whispered prayers for the young bride being sent away with an old, disabled stranger. "Come, wife," Baba Bola called, his voice neither harsh nor particularly kind. "Our journey is long, and we must reach the crossroads before midday." With one last look at the only home she had known since her parents' death, Nene climbed into the wagon, her heart heavy as a stone in the dry riverbed of her chest. As the oxen began to move, pulling them away from Kosala village, not a single tear fell from her eyes. What use were tears now? Her fate was sealed by the words spoken over calabash cups the night before. The landscape began to change as they journeyed farther than Nini had ever traveled. The familiar acacia trees and baobabs of her homeland gave way to denser forests, where monkeys chattered in the canopy above. They forded shallow rivers, where women she did not recognize pounded clothes on smooth stones, looking up with curious eyes at the passing wagon. Throughout that first day, Nene sat in silence, watching her known world disappear behind them. Baba Bola spoke little, occasionally instructing his servants in a language Nene did not understand. She noticed that they treated him with a deference that seemed excessive for a beggar, but perhaps this was simply his household custom. As the next day of their journey dawned, the landscape transformed once more. The dense forest gave way to rolling hills, dotted with cultivated fields that stretched like green and gold patchwork quilts across the earth. In the distance, Nin could see clusters of houses, far larger than any in Kosala village, their walls painted in bright colors that gleamed in the morning sun. "We approach my homeland," Baba Bola announced, a new timbre in his voice that Nene had not heard before, something almost regal in its confidence. The road widened and smoothed beneath their wagon wheels. They passed farmers, who bowed their heads respectfully as their convoy moved past. Nene noticed, with growing bewilderment, that many called out greetings, using titles she did not understand, certainly not names one would use for a beggar. "Baba," she ventured cautiously, "these people seem to know you well." The old man merely smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling like folded palm leaves. "Patience, Nene. All questions will find their answers when we reach our destination." As the sun climbed higher in the vast African sky, they crested a hill, and Nini's breath caught in her throat. Below them, nestled like a jewel between two protecting arms of the hills, stood a compound so vast and magnificent it could have housed all of Kosala village within its walls. A stone fence taller than 3 men surrounded buildings with gleaming white walls and red tiled roofs. Gardens with flowering plants of every color imaginable bordered pathways paved with flat stones. Servants moved purposefully across the grounds, their colorful garments marking them as members of a prosperous household. "What is this place?" Nene whispered, her voice barely audible above the creaking of the wagon wheels. "Home," Baba Bola replied simply. As they approached massive wooden gates, carved with symbols of prosperity and protection, guards stationed on either side straightened to attention. One called out in a booming voice, "Open the gates! The master has returned." The master? Nene's mind raced with confusion as their wagon passed through the gates into a courtyard where more servants awaited, their faces alight with obvious joy at their master's return. This was no beggar's hovel. This was the estate of someone with power and wealth beyond anything Nini had ever imagined. The wagon came to a stop before the main house, its facade adorned with intricate carvings and columns that reached toward the heavens. A servant approached to assist Baba Bola from the wagon, But what happened next would forever be etched in Nene's memory. Baba Bola raised his hand, dismissing the servant with a gentle gesture. Then, before Nene's disbelieving eyes, he gripped the sides of the wagon and stood, rose to his full height without assistance, his legs suddenly strong and steady beneath him. But you cannot walk," Nene gasped, pressing herself against the far side of the wagon, her eyes wide with shock. "Your legs, the wheelchair, for years at the marketplace." Baba Bola turned to her, standing tall and proud, no trace of disability in his posture. The transformation was complete. The hunched beggar was gone, replaced by a man whose bearing spoke of authority and power. "Forgive the deception, Nene," he said, his voice now rich and commanding. "There is much to explain, and I promise you will understand all. But first, welcome to your new home." Stunned beyond words, Nene allowed herself to be helped from the wagon by female servants who appeared at her side, their gentle hands steadying her trembling form. The ground beneath her feet felt unreal, as if she might be walking in a dream from which she would soon awaken. The main house door swung open, revealing an interior that defied Nene's wildest imagination. Woven rugs in vibrant patterns, covered floors of polished stone. Tapestries depicting ancient stories hung from walls illuminated by oil lamps in brass holders. Carved furniture inlaid with precious metals and ivory stood in rooms larger than Oko's entire compound. As Nene was led through this palace, for what else could one call such splendor? Servants bowed respectfully, addressing her as mistress and honored one. Her simple dress and head wrap, which had been her finest clothes in Kosala, now seemed like beggar's rags amid such opulence. In a daze, she was shown to a chamber that they said would be hers, a room with a bed raised from the floor on a carved wooden frame, covered with cushions and fine cotton sheets. A copper basin, filled with scented water, awaited on a side table, and a young woman stood ready to help her refresh herself after the journey. "Rest now," the servant girl said kindly. "New garments worthy of your position will be brought soon. The master asks that you join him for the evening meal, where all will be explained." Left alone in this unimaginable luxury, Nene sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind spinning like leaves caught in a whirlwind. The crippled beggar who walked, the magnificent estate, the servants who treated her with respect she had never known. What sorcery was this? What game was being played with her life? As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the white walls of her chamber with golden light, Nene found herself caught between fear and wonder, between suspicion and hope. As evening shadows lengthened across the magnificent estate, Nene was transformed by the skilled hands of her attendants. Gone was the dust-covered village girl in simple cotton. In her place stood a young woman adorned in the finest blue and gold damask, her hair freshly braided with cowrie shells and brass beads that chimed softly with each movement. A mirror of polished brass revealed a stranger to her own eyes. Was this truly Nene, the orphan who had scrubbed Madame Teresa's pots until her fingers bled? When the time came, she was led through corridors lit by oil lamps that casted dancing shadows on walls adorned with ancestral masks and woven tapestries. The great dining hall awaited, a space that could have held the entire marketplace of Kozala within its walls. A long table of polished ebony gleamed in the light of 100 candles, laden with dishes whose aromas made Nene's mouth water despite her nervousness. At the head of this magnificent spread stood Baba Bola, yet not the Baba Bola she had known. Gone were the beggar's rags, replaced by robes of rich indigo embroidered with golden thread. His once matted grey hair was now neatly combed, adorned with beads that marked him as a man of high status. His back, formerly hunched in apparent weakness, was straight and proud. But it was not the transformed Baba Bola who caught and held Nene's attention. Rather, it was the young man who stood beside him, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin smooth as polished mahogany and eyes that seemed to capture the candlelight within their depths. A smile graced his handsome face as his gaze met hers, a smile that sent a strange flutter through Nene's chest. "Come, Nene," Baba Bola called, his voice warm with approval as he beheld her. "Join us at the table. There is much to explain." Gathering her courage, Nene approached, her new sandals whispering against the floor. The young man stepped forward, taking her hand with a gentleness that stirred something within her she had never felt before. "I am Toby," he said, his voice deep and melodious as a twilight drum. "Son of the man you know as Baba Bola. It brings me great joy to finally meet you." Bewildered, Nene allowed herself to be seated at the grand table, where servants immediately began filling her plate with delicacies she had only heard of in travelers' tales. Roasted meats seasoned with rare spices, yams prepared in sweet palm oil, vegetables unknown in her village, and fruits whose names she could not pronounce. "You must have many questions," Baba Bola, or whoever he truly was, said once they had begun their meal. "I owe you the truth, and I pray you will find it in your heart to forgive the deception." And so, as they dined beneath the watchful eyes of carved ancestral figures, the tale unfolded. Baba Bola revealed his true identity as Chief Adebola, a wealthy merchant whose trading caravans traveled the great salt roads from the forests to the desert's edge. "Years ago," he explained, his eyes growing distant with memory, "I married a woman of great beauty, but hidden character. I showered her with wealth and affection, only to discover she loved my riches, not me. When I was away on trading journeys, she would steal from my stores and mistreat my servants. Eventually, she fled with my trusted friend and half my fortune." Nene listened, rapt with attention, as Chief Adebola continued his tale. "When my son Tobys reached the age to marry, I vowed he would not suffer the same fate. What use is wealth if it brings only false affection? What value have possessions if they attract those who love things more than people?" He gestured to his son with evident pride. "I told Toby I would find him a wife whose heart was pure, whose spirit was strong, who would love him for himself and not his inheritance." Toby's eyes had not left Nene's face as his father spoke. "My father decided to disguise himself as a beggar and travel to villages far from our lands, where our wealth and name were unknown. For 2 years, he has searched for a woman who shows kindness to those who can offer nothing in return. And in the marketplace of Kosala," Chief Adebola continued, "I found you, Nene. A girl who shared her meager food with a beggar. A girl who smiled despite cruelty. A girl whose spirit remained unbroken by hardship." Tobys leaned forward, his gaze intense yet gentle. "My father wrote to me of you many times, of your kindness, your strength, your beauty that comes from within. I have waited many moons to meet the woman who won my father's approval through the purity of her heart alone." Nene sat in stunned silence, the rich food forgotten on her plate as the truth of her situation slowly dawned. This was no cruel trick, no evil scheme, but a test she had passed without knowing she was being tested. "Nene," Chief Adebola said gently, "the marriage ceremony performed in your village was between you and me, but it was never my intention to claim you as my wife. If you choose, and only if you choose, my son Toby would be honored to take you as his bride. But if this is not your wish, you will still have a place in this household, and dowry enough to determine your own path. Tobys' eyes held hope and something more, a spark of admiration that Nene had never seen directed at her before. I would consider myself blessed, he said softly, if you would allow me the time to earn your affection as truly as you have already earned mine through my father's tales. The candles continued to burn, casting their golden light across the feast, as Nene found herself at a crossroads, unlike any she could have imagined when she awoke that morning in Madame Teresa's compound. As the night deepened around the great house, Nene was granted time alone to consider all she had learned. In her luxurious chamber, with moonlight streaming through latticed windows, she paced across the woven rugs, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. The ancestors say that when life presents a crossroads, one must listen not only to the head, which can be deceived, but to the heart, which knows truths beyond understanding. So Nene placed her hand upon her chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm, and asked herself the questions that would determine her path forward. What awaits me if I refuse this offer? She whispered to the silent room. Freedom, yes, and wealth enough to choose my own destiny. I could return to Kosala as a woman of means, no longer at the mercy of Madame Teresa's cruelty. The thought brought a smile to her lips, imagining the shock on her tormentor's face if she were to return adorned in fine cloth, with servants of her own. Yet the smile faded quickly, for what true joy would there be in such revenge? What happiness in returning to a place that held only memories of suffering? And if I accept, she continued, moving to the window where she could see the vast gardens silvered by moonlight. If I become Tobys' wife? She recalled his eyes, warm and honest as they met hers across the table. Unlike the calculating stares of the village boys who had sometimes followed her to the stream, Tobys' gaze held respect alongside admiration. He had not presumed, had not demanded, but offered choice where she had never been given choices before. And there was something else, something that stirred in her chest when their hands had touched, a feeling new and fragile as a butterfly's first flight, yet powerful enough to quicken her breath. The gods led me here for a reason, Nene murmured, watching the stars that spangled the night sky, the same stars that had watched over her parents, that had witnessed her tears in Oko's compound, that had guided her journey to this place. Perhaps this is not the end of a trial, but the beginning of a blessing. When morning light gilded the compound once more, Nene's decision was made. She met with Chief Adebola and Toby in the family's private courtyard, where birds sang among flowering trees, and a small fountain played a gentle melody of falling water. I have considered your offer, she said, standing tall and proud before them, no longer the cowering servant girl afraid of the next blow. Before I give my answer, I must speak my truth. Chief Adebola nodded encouragingly, while Toby watched her with hopeful eyes. The deception you practiced was born of wisdom, not cruelty, Nene acknowledged. Yet know this, the woman who stands before you was not created by your test. The kindness you saw in me was planted by parents who loved me before the fever took them. The strength you admired was forged in hardship, not broken by it. A smile of approval spread across the chief's face as Toby stepped forward. I would have this woman not as my possession, Nene continued, her voice steady, but as my companion. Not as my superior, but as my equal in all things. Nothing would honor me more, Toby replied, his voice thick with emotion. My father sought a woman of character for his son, but I find myself blessed beyond measure to meet a woman of such wisdom as well. And so, with the morning sun as witness, Nene gave her consent, not in haste born of fear, as in Oko's compound, but in certainty born of choice. In the days that followed, Nene's transformation continued, not merely in the fine garments that now adorned her, or the gold that circled her wrists, but in the blossoming of her spirit. No longer did she smile to mask her pain. Now her laughter rang true and clear throughout the compound. Chief Adebola embraced her as the daughter he had never had, instructing her in the management of the household and the family's trading enterprises. The servants, who had known of the chief's plan from the beginning, welcomed her warmly, happy to see their young master matched with a bride worthy of his kind heart. And Toby, gentle, patient Toby, courted her properly, sharing stories beneath the baobab tree in the garden, teaching her to ride the fine horses from his father's stables, listening with genuine interest to her tales of village life. With each passing day, the delicate feeling in Nene's heart grew stronger, transforming from cautious hope to something deeper and more enduring. The orphan, who had once slept on a thin mat in a storage hut, now stood at the threshold of a new life, not as a servant, but as a beloved daughter, an honored wife-to-be, and a woman whose inner worth had been recognized at last. When the rains returned to bless the land, marking the beginning of new growth and prosperity, the time came for Nene and Tobys' wedding celebration. Unlike the hasty ceremony in Kosala village, this union would be honored with 7 days of festivities that would be remembered for generations to come. Word was sent to all corners of Chief Adebola's territories. Traders suspended their journeys, farmers paused their planting, and artisans set aside their crafts to bear witness to the marriage that had begun with such unusual circumstances. On the first morning of celebration, as dawn painted the sky in hues of amber and gold, Nini was prepared by the women of the household. They anointed her with oils pressed from rare blossoms, adorned her with jewelry crafted by the finest goldsmiths of the region, and dressed her in a gown woven with threads that captured sunlight itself. Upon her head, they placed a crown of cowrie shells and beads arranged in patterns that told the story of her journey from orphan to bride. The compound was transformed into a wonderland of color and sound. Canopies of dyed cloth created shaded gathering places where elders shared wisdom and children played. The aromas of festive dishes filled the air. Whole roasted goats seasoned with peppers and herbs. Enormous pots of jollof rice glowing red in the sunlight. Sweet pastries drizzled with honey and sprinkled with ground kola nuts. As Nene emerged from her chambers to meet her groom, 100 drums began to speak at once. The deep boom of ceremonial drums, carved from ancient trees. The rapid patter of talking drums that shared the couple's praises in a language older than words. The joyful rhythm of women's drums that called all to witness this blessed union. Toby awaited her in the center of the great courtyard, his own garments reflecting his status as son of a great merchant and heir to trading routes that stretched across kingdoms. Yet, it was not his finery that drew Nene's gaze, but the smile that transformed his face when he beheld her, a smile that mirrored the joy shining from her own heart. They stood together before the oldest elder, whose wrinkled hands joined theirs as he called upon ancestors and deities to bless their union. Libations were poured, promises exchanged, and ancient words spoken that bound them together according to traditions passed down since the world began. What wonder it was to see the orphan girl who once fetched water from a distant stream now honored by hundreds. Those who had traveled from Kosala village to witness the celebration, including a stunned Uncle Oko and a sour-faced Madame Teresa, could scarcely believe that the radiant bride was the same child they had treated as little more than a servant. As the celebration continued into the night, with dancers performing by firelight and griots singing tales of legendary love that endured all challenges, Nini found a moment to stand apart with her new husband. Once, I believed the spirits had abandoned me, she confessed, gazing up at stars that seemed to dance in rhythm with the music below. Now I see they were guiding me all along, through darkness toward light. Tobys' hand found hers, their fingers intertwining like destiny itself. Perhaps that is why the ancestors gave you your name. Nene, the gift. You are a gift waiting to be discovered, a treasure hidden by hardship until the right moment. And so our tale comes full circle, my friends. The girl who once ran from cruelty now walked toward joy. The orphan, once starved of love, now feasted on affection freely given. The servant once commanded by others now stood as mistress of a great household, respected for her wisdom and cherished for her kind heart. The elders say that life's path rarely runs straight like a spear, but rather curves and twists like a river, finding its way to the sea. What seems a misfortune may be blessing in disguise. What appears as ending may be but the beginning of something greater than we dared imagine. My cherished listeners, our story ends here. What moral lesson did you learn from Nini's story? Kindly drop them in the comment section. Don't forget to like and share this video. Also, kindly subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so that you are the first to get notified immediately we drop the next amazing video. Until our paths cross again beneath the story tree, may your journey be blessed, and may you recognize the hidden blessings that come disguised as challenges.